John 3:16 in Papatar says, "Go gamanga kalak no lahano, nga tule no na haliana kase, be sige hinunuatana panahiro sembe nalon hatika." You all don't understand that, but now 10,000 people that speak that language have the potential to understand the gospel in their language. Papua New Guinea is the most diverse language or country in the world with 850 different people groups that speak their own language. And it's been a privilege to be able to work in one of those. It's also a privilege to be back here in the Midwest with family and friends and food and farmland and football. Last night for Husker fans, you got an opportunity to increase your accounting skills a bit higher than normal. Iowa and Iowa State fans, man, there were records to be set either way there. Quite a rivalry. That was a good game. But today, I'm excited to be back at Lamar's Bible Church. We were here 4 years ago and had the opportunity to be part of the missions conference, and we're here again, and it's always a highlight for us. We're going to be talking through the book of Daniel. Being faithful to the one who calls is the theme for this missions conference, and we're going to hit a different topic for each day. And you'll see those on the slide projector there. When your world is rocked, being faithful to the one who calls is what we're talking about today. And then in the following days, it will be when danger is imminent, when the world parties, and when no one else is. Are we faithful to the one who calls? To start off, though, I want to give a little bit of an update about our family. We have 4 girls. Lori and I, we have 4 girls, but 2 are out of the home. Our oldest is living in Wisconsin, starting to engage in missions in the stateside with MK Care. Our second is married in England. She just finished her nursing school after 3 years, and I'll mention a little bit more about that in a while, but her and her husband are there. Our third is Kylie. She's back here with my wife and other daughter. She just graduated from high school and plans to attend college for teaching math in the future. And then Briella is 13, but she was here at this missions conference 13 years ago. It was her first major outing after being born a preemie and getting out of the hospital and home. She came here as a 3-pounder. So now, 13 years later, she is just a little bit more than 3 pounds, and it's good to be back. We have had the opportunity to serve about 15 years working exclusively with the Papatar people. And now we are in a leadership role, getting into other tribes, helping other teams. But we still have the privilege to get back into the village. So So we have to get over to the other side. Now, 20 years ago, that was quite a task. Now, with the road improvement, it's a lot easier. In fact, they have buses that go back and forth in the form of these minivans, and they've started to put all kinds of fun English names that they try to make them really cool with. So this one is called Expendable Trans. In the context that trans means transportation, in case you were wondering, I am still worried about what expendable means in that case. Now, in the States, these vans are seated for 7 people. They're called 7-passenger minivans. They reconstruct them there, and they're called 15-passenger vans. But on this particular trip, we had 23 of us in that minivan. So you get in that, you go over to our side of the island, and that's where we are. Now, on the way out, we actually were able to use a different option and leave straight from the village in a... Spend time again with the churches that God has established. Meeting together with them, with Bible studies, with families, coming alongside, discipling, encouraging, teaching, and that's what we're going to go back into for a year. We're going to go back into the village and live with them, help them through the next stage. While we're there, we always enjoy fellowship, involves food, With any good church, you have fellowship and food. And we don't have a pizza ranch there, but we do have banana leaves that you can pile rice and sweet potato and yams and taro and fish and spinach and drizzle it all with coconut soup, and then everybody digs in with their hands, and it's a lot like an all-you-can-eat buffet. So we do have that. Now, in the last term, there has been some difficulties that the church has gone through, and one of them took place in the community last Christmas. And we were in right after this happened, but there was a big fight that broke out between one of the clans there in the village where we're at, and they started to fight with each other. And unfortunately, two of the believers actually got involved in this fight. But the whole community was at war with each other. And it started with small fights, and it grew and grew into big house burnings. When the mob came through one of the hamlets, two of the men in our church were not home, and the mob approached their houses and set them on fire, and the wives and kids had to run for the jungle. Another one of our believers tried to go in to mediate and to help and to check to make sure his kids weren't involved, and he was struck in the eye with a stone from a slingshot. And today he's blind in that eye. And at times like that, my Papatar friends, their world is rocked a bit. And at times like that, we're sometimes worried, like, is this going to turn them away from God, or what's going to happen? And I want to tell you that Long East, the one whose eye was hit, after this time, God has worked in his life. And just a couple months ago, he stepped onto our translation team to help us try to finish some of the Old Testament translation portions we're doing. And then this last week, I got a phone call. We live in a village where there's no electricity, no running water, no toilets, but they have cell phones. And I got a phone call, and it was one of the pastors in the church, and he said, hey, this tragedy happened in this family's life in the church. Their world was rocked. Guess who came to spend time with them, to be with them? It was Longies. And when his world was rocked, he was faithful to the one who called. Now, his world isn't the only one that was rocked. All of you, at some point, have had or will have your world rocked to some extent. Whether it's the loss of a family member, a situation that comes up, a life circumstance, something unexpected that is there that you weren't expecting. And in those moments, are we going to continue to be faithful to the one who calls us to do life with him? Over 2,500 years ago, there was a man by the name of Jeremiah. He was a prophet. He started his ministry in 627 BC. And he started to warn the people of Israel, the people of Judah, to turn back to God because they had gone astray. But the people didn't listen. For over 20 years, they mocked him. The priests actually persecuted him, put him in stocks. Ted, be quiet. The people are fine. They can go on and do those things, those lifestyles, those behaviors. God's going to bless them anyway. The false prophets proclaimed the same message. The kings that he served under imprisoned him, threatened him, tried to kill him. In Jeremiah, he wrote these words in chapter 25, verse 8. Therefore, thus says the Lord of hosts, because you have not obeyed my words, behold, I will send for all the tribes of the north, declares the Lord, and for Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, my servant, and I will bring them against this land and its inhabitants, and against all these surrounding nations. I will devote them to destruction and make them a horror, a hissing, and everlasting desolation. Moreover, I will banish them from the voice of mirth and the voice of gladness and the voice of the bridegroom and the voice of the bride, the grinding of the millstone and the light of the lamp. This whole land shall become a ruin and a waste, and these nations shall serve the king of Babylon 70 years. Jeremiah's serving King Nebuchadnezzar in Babylon for 70 years? That's not going to happen. But in 605 BC, Nebuchadnezzar and his army broke through the walls of Jerusalem. And they ransacked it, and they pulled the first of the captives back to Babylon. One, a teenager by the name of Daniel. His world was rocked at that point. A few years later, they came in to Jerusalem and destroyed it. Not many years after that, the final besieging, destroying all of Judah, and it would never be a nation like it was before. God's words came true, and they were rocked. And Daniel was one of those that his whole world was changed. He was taken to a land that was completely different than his. The land of Babylon, known as Shinar, where the Chaldeans or the Babylonians lived, was vast. Here's a drawing of what it may have looked like. Its 200,000 residents were inside a double-walled structure. I want to mention 3 points there: the Ishtar Gate, the Hanging Gardens, the temple. The first one, that blue Ishtar Gate, has been reconstructed. It's in Iraq. That was the grand entrance as you went into Babylon. Then a little further were the Hanging Gardens. We're not sure exactly what they look like, but one of the seven ancient wonders of the world. As you kept going, came to a 300-foot tall ziggurat, 7 tiers, to the god Marduk. Nebuchadnezzar restored that. He did the gardens. He did the gate. He was a polytheist, worshiping all the gods. And now he had these captives, not only from Judah and Israel, but from all the nations in the area. Let's look at the book of Daniel, chapter 1, verse 1 and 2. It says this: In the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem and besieged it. And the Lord gave Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand, and some of the vessels of the house of God. And he brought them to the land of Shinar, to the house of his God, and placed the vessels in the treasury of his God. Note that those vessels that left the temple in Jerusalem are now possibly in this ziggurat. If not that, another temple, a treasury on display to show what Nebuchadnezzar had done in his might to take all the treasures from all these other gods from all the other nations. But those vessels from the temple are the bookends of the Babylonian rule over Israel. They mark its beginning and its end, which we will see on Friday night. Reading on in verse 3, Then the king commanded Ashpenaz, his chief eunuch, to bring some of the people of Israel, both the royal family and the nobility, youths without blemish, of good appearance, and skillful in all wisdom, endowed with knowledge, understanding, learning, and competent to stand in the king's palace and to teach them literature and language of the Chaldeans. This was an interview to get into this essentially college of learning. And Nebuchadnezzar said, I want the best, the brightest, the royal land, the good-looking ones, and they're going to come study, and they're going to learn the literature and the language of the Babylonians. The Babylonians invented the 12-month lunar calendar. They had a number system based on 12, multiples of 12. So 60 was a prime number that they used, and it's from Babylon that we get our 60 seconds in a minute and 60 minutes in an hour. It's from Babylon that we get our 360 degrees in a circle. It's from Babylon that geometry was further developed. They were leaders in architecture and math and literature and art and science. They knew the stars and the planets, and they would track them. And now Daniel's in this brand new world without a family, and he's forced to be part of this school. Reading on, in verse 5, the king assigned them a daily portion of food that the king ate and of the wine that he drank. They were to be educated for 3 years, and at the end of the time, they were to stand before the king. As I mentioned, my daughter just finished from the university in Bristol, England, a 3-year child's nursing program. Most of the colleges and universities in the UK and Europe are a 3-year program. The students don't work during those 3 years because it's so intense. That 3-year program is modeled, most believe, after these early days of Babylon, a 3-year program. And this came with a full ride tuition. Daniel got to be there with room and board and a meal plan. Verse 8. But Daniel resolved that he would not defile himself with the king's food or with the wine that he drank. Therefore he asked the chief of the eunuchs to allow him not to defile himself. Daniel, this is the first recorded evidence that we have of a student complaining about the cafeteria food. But this was the king's best. And we know he didn't say, I'm not going to eat that because it was wine or because he wanted a healthier lifestyle alternative. Most scholars believe, most theologians believe, it was either because this defied the laws of God, the kosher diet that the people of God were supposed to follow. And so Daniel didn't want to defile himself and break the laws of God. Or this meat and this wine was offered to Marduk and the other gods around Babylon. So he requested, hey, I don't want to eat this. And he went to his, I would guess it would be like student advisor, and said, I can't eat this. Can you help me? Now, Nebuchadnezzar wasn't a nice king. And if you didn't do things the way he wanted, your head would roll, literally. And so his advisor said, I don't know that I can do that. And yet, Daniel came with a plan. Verse 12, he says, test your servant for 10 days. Let us be given vegetables to eat and water to drink. Then let our appearance and the appearance of the youths who eat the king's food be observed by you, and deal with your servants according to what you see. So he listened to them in this matter and tested them for 10 days. At the end of 10 days, it was seen that they were better in appearance and fatter in flesh than all the youths who ate the king's food. So the steward took away their food and wine and they were to drink, and gave them vegetables. Some of the college students here might think, hey, vegetables for 3 years might be pretty rough. But Daniel made a decision, and his decision was this. He resolved not to defile himself instead of running with the crowd. He said, I am not going to do this thing, even though everyone around me is doing it. I'm in this college setting, in another place, in another culture, with all these other students from all these other nations, and they're doing it. I'm not going to. And I want us to look at 3 quick principles. First, he didn't blame God or his upbringing. Man, in a situation like this, it says that God allowed Nebuchadnezzar to take out Judah and Jerusalem. It was God that said, Nebuchadnezzar's going to take you captive. God, you did this. Why am I going to follow your laws if you're just about a God that's going to destroy us? But I didn't blame God. He didn't blame his upbringing either. I don't know if his parents were following the ways of Yahweh, and if so, man, they led Daniel and they did it well because he stood by himself. But if they were like most people in his society, they were just Christian in name. They were just followers of Yahweh in name, but lived however they want. And yet somehow, whether it was through the prophet Jeremiah or other teachers or his parents, Daniel understood what God wanted. And he resolved not to defile himself instead of running with the crowd. But he didn't blame God or his upbringing. Second, he didn't indulge in his new freedom. Here's your opportunity, man. You're away from home. You're away from mommy and daddy. You can do what you want. You're indulge all the meat and wine you want. You can live how you want. The immorality that was associated with the gods of Babylon was prevalent. Do what you want. Nobody's going to know. It's cool. And yet he didn't. Third, he was considerate of others in suggesting a way forward. Did you see how he talked to his advisor? I don't know if I can do that for you. Okay. How about this? Let's just do like a 10-day test thing. If it works, go with it. That way you'll look okay. We'll get what we want. He was wise. He handled the culture. He handled the setting appropriately. Daniel, along with his 3 friends that we'll look at on Thursday, were in the school for 2 more years, starting into their 3rd year, their senior year, and the king has a dream. Chapter 2, the king dreams this dream, and he decides that he's going to call in his enchanters and his wise men and the Chaldeans and his astrologers, and he's going to ask them what his dream meant. But he said this, I'm not going to tell you my dream. I want you to tell me my dream and then tell me what it means. The people he called in felt like they couldn't do that. Let's look at it. In chapter 2, we'll start in verse 10. The Chaldeans answered the king and said, there is not a man on earth who can meet the king's demands, for no great and powerful king has asked such a thing of any magician or enchanter or Chaldean. The thing that the king asks is difficult, and no one can show it to the king except the gods, whose dwelling is not with flesh. You're crazy. But they didn't tell him that. They just said, this is impossible. No one can do what you're asking. The only ones that can do this are the gods, but they're not with us. This didn't make Nebuchadnezzar happy at all. Verse 12, because of this, the king was angry and very furious and commanded that all the wise men of Babylon be destroyed. So the decree went out, and the wise men were about to be killed, and they sought Daniel and his companions to kill them. Second point. I'll come back to her. Daniel resorted to prayer and praise instead of protesting and pouting. Here was Daniel. He had a year left of study, and he was going to be called one of these wise men. And yet somehow those who had already graduated, those who were already working for the king, couldn't get it right, and now the death sentence had been handed out to all of them and to him. That's not fair. He didn't get to stand before the king because he wasn't even graduated yet. That's not fair. Why should he suffer because they failed? Besides that, that's not fair. The king should have told him what the dream was. But Daniel didn't pout. He didn't protest. Instead, he did these 3 things. He rallied his friends to pray with him. He slept. And he praised God for who he was and what he did. I want us to look at that together. In verse 17. Then Daniel went to his house and made the matter known to Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, his companions, and told them to seek mercy from the God of heaven concerning this mystery, so that Daniel and his companions might not be destroyed with the rest of the wise men of Babylon. Then the mystery was revealed to Daniel in a vision of the night. Then Daniel blessed the God of heaven. What did he do? Hey, where are my 3 buddies? Guys, we need to pray about this. And I don't think this was your casual Facebook comment, text thing, praying for you. This was a, let's get together, let's get on our knees, let's pray for this situation. They rallied together and prayed. And then it says that God gave him a vision of the night. Most scholars believe that that meant it was in a dream. That means that Daniel slept. How many of you, with your life on the line, could say, okay, good night, I'm going to go turn in. And yet Daniel had peace about this situation and committed it to God, and he slept. And in the vision of the night, God revealed it to him. The third thing, then, he blessed God. And I would challenge you to read verses 20 through 23 later as a personal prayer of blessing to God. And then I want to take you back and tell you about this friend of ours, a Papatar girl named Wendy. She's the sister of Anna, who has a story in that book of Tales from the Tribe. But Wendy's a special girl because she's the first Papatar Christian who finished grade 12, went on to get a college teaching certificate, and become a teacher. And her hope and desire was to get back into the Papatar tribe and teach at one of the schools there. And they said, we can do that for you, and we'll provide housing and pay. But just over a year ago, when she was assigned her first year of teaching, it wasn't on Papatar, it was the next island out, an island called Lahir, which is a big gold and silver mine, full of company and expatriates, and it's a mess. And they provided housing, but one of the walls was caved in. They provided water, kind of. They had a water tank, but it had holes in it. They didn't provide food. They gave her a little plot of land and said, you got to grow your own food there. And they said, we'll pay you. But they didn't for over a year. That wasn't the kind of phone call she was hoping for. That wasn't the calling she thought she would get. And yet, she stuck it out. Anna, her sister, went over and spent months with her, helping her. Her brother-in-law, a believer in our church, went over on the weekends, repairing her house, planting her garden. This year, she just started her second year. She doesn't want to be there, but she feels that God has led her to this place. The school is not great. The teachers are even worse. But she feels that God has her there to minister to the students. And this year, her mom, who is not yet a Christian, has gone over to live with her. She is not in a great situation, but she has chosen not to defile herself. And she had to make all kinds of special requests in a special way to even be there and continue to live in a safe situation. And she has constantly been asking for prayer. And I invite you to pray along with her. Daniel was in a rough situation, and God granted him victory in that. The third and last thing is this. Daniel readily witnessed in the workplace instead of working the system. Man, this was a possibility of an early draft, so to speak, because he got the vision. Let's look at verse 25. Then Arioch brought in Daniel before the king in haste and said thus to him, I have found among the exiles from Judah a man who will make known to the king the interpretation. Big announcement. Verse 28 or 26. The king declared to Daniel, whose name was Belteshazzar, are you able to make known to me the dream that I have seen and its interpretation? Here's the chance. Yes, I can. I can make it known. That's the way to climb the corporate ladder. That's the way to get to the top of your class. That's the way to get in the job you want. But instead, he readily witnessed in the workplace instead of working the system. Verse 27, Daniel answered the king and said, "No wise man, enchanter, magician, or astrologer can show to the king the mystery that the king has asked." Same thing the other guys said when the death sentence was given. But he goes on, "But there is a God in heaven who reveals the mysteries, and he has made known to the king Nebuchadnezzar what will be in the latter days. Your dream and the visions of your head as you lay in bed are these. To you, O king, as you lay in bed came the thoughts of what would be after this. And he who reveals the mystery has made known to you what is to me. But as for me, this mystery has been revealed to me, not because of any wisdom that I have, more than all the living, but in order that the interpretation may be known to the king, and that you may know the thoughts of your mind." What did Daniel do? He knew who the real king was. My king is the king of the universe, not the king of Babylon. He also knew where his abilities come from. It's not me. It's not because I'm wiser than anybody else. It's from him. And he also knew the end of the story. And we don't have time to go into the dream in detail, but I want to summarize it by reading a few verses of what the dream was. Verse 31, "You saw, O king, and behold, a great image. This image, mighty and exceeding brightness, stood before you, and its appearance was frightening. The head of the image was of fine gold." That was the Babylonians. "Its chest and arms of silver." That's the Medes and the Persians. "Its middle and thighs of bronze." That's the Greek Empire. "Its legs of iron." That's the Romans. "And its feet partly of iron and partly of clay." Those are the 10 divided nations that are yet to come. "Then the iron and the clay and the bronze and the silver and the gold all together were broken in pieces and became like chaff of the summer threshing floor. And the wind..." I skipped verse 34. "As you looked, a stone was cut out by human hands, and it struck the image on the feet of the iron and clay and broke them to pieces. Then the iron and the clay and the bronze, silver, and the gold all together was broken into pieces and became like the chaff of the summer threshing floor. And the wind carried them away so that not a trace of them could be found. But the stone that struck the image became a great mountain and filled the whole earth." Later in the book of Daniel, Daniel refers to that stone as the Son of Man. And Jesus came and proclaimed himself as the Son of Man. And Jesus is that stone that is returning. His kingdom will never end. And Daniel knew the end of the story. And he knew it wasn't for King Nebuchadnezzar in Babylon. It was for the king who is coming. Daniel 2:44, "It's the rock, Jesus Christ, shall break in pieces all these kingdoms and bring them to an end, and it shall stand forever." Daniel 7:27, "His kingdom shall be an everlasting kingdom, and all dominions shall serve and obey him." Daniel wasn't afraid to witness in the workplace because he knew who the king was. He knew where his abilities came from, and he knew the end of the story. And it wasn't about gaining wealth and prominence and prestige in Babylon. It was about making this king known. And now the greatest king on earth concludes chapter 2 with this. Starting in verse 46. "Then King Nebuchadnezzar fell on his face and paid homage to Daniel and commanded that an offering and incense be offered up to him. The king answered and said to Daniel, 'Truly your God is God of gods and Lord of kings, and a revealer of mysteries, for you have been able to reveal this mystery.' Then the king gave Daniel high honors and many great gifts, and made him ruler over the whole province of Babylon, and prefect over all the wise men of Babylon. Daniel made a request of the king, and he appointed Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego over the affairs of the province of Babylon. But Daniel remained in the king's court." God chose to bless Daniel because he was a witness in the workplace. And now Nebuchadnezzar has a little bit more of who this God was. And we'll look at his life in the coming days, but over the next 70 plus years, Daniel served in Babylon, but his true king was seated on the throne in heaven. I want to close with a short story about a man who is inspirational to me, a man who stood like Daniel, but unlike Daniel, his end was not good. And that's this: William Borden. He graduated from a Chicago high school in 1904. From a very wealthy family. When he graduated at the age of 16, he was already a millionaire. And his parents, for his graduation, gave him a trip around the world for a year. And he went through Asia and the Middle East and Europe. And during that time, God began to call him towards missions. In a letter back home, he wrote that he desired to be a missionary. He had a Bible with him, and inside the front of that Bible cover, he wrote these words: no reserve. He got back to America and started at Yale University in 1905. And he started something in his freshman year there. He started meeting with one individual for prayer once a week before classes started. They invited another. At the end of his freshman year, there were 150 students meeting for prayer. By his senior year, 1,000 of the 1,300 Yale students were meeting in groups for prayer. During this time, Borden's missionary call narrowed to the Muslim people in China of the Kansu. He decided, that's where I'm going to go. Upon graduation from Yale, he got offered high-paid jobs, but he declined. And in the front of his Bible, on the inside cover, he wrote these words: no retreat. When he finished all his studies, he sailed for China. But because he was hoping to work with the Muslim people, he stopped first in Egypt to study Arabic. While there, he contracted spinal meningitis, and within a month, at the age of 25, he was dead. They sent back his belongings and his Bible to his family. And the last thing he wrote inside the cover of his Bible was this: no regret. Man, he had a life laid out before him, a life of wealth and luxury. And I've got questions. Why did God allow that? But when news spread, hundreds volunteered and stepped up. Because there are hundreds of nations and people groups that still need the Lord. And he decided the King who's in heaven and his kingdom is what is worth serving. So this week and for our life, are we willing to follow and be faithful to the one who calls, even when your world is rocked? Father, thank you for this time. Thank you for the life of Daniel. May we live not for America, not for our jobs, not for ourselves, but may we live for you. May we remember who our King is, and when our world gets rocked and we don't understand what's going on and we feel like all is a loss, may we be continuing to stand faithfully, serving the one who calls us. We thank you for the rock of our salvation, Jesus Christ. And it's in his name I pray. Amen. Thank you. Have a good Sunday.